What's up guys, Happy New Year and welcome to my first performance car review of 2023. And what a way to kick it off with this very special 2013 Audi TT RS. I've actually had this car for about a month now. This car belongs to my friend Gregory, who is currently looking after my 2022 Subaru BRZ. I've mostly been driving this car around town for the last month, but today it's time to find out what the RS badge really stands for. It is based on the Mk2 Audi TT. This car features a 2.5-liter turbocharged inline 5-cylinder engine, which makes about 360 horsepower and 343 pound-feet of torque. The car weighs right around 3,300 pounds, it's got a 6-speed manual transmission, and of course it has Audi's Quattro all-wheel drive system. It is a Haldex all-wheel drive system, meaning it's primarily front-wheel drive, but it can send power to the rear axle when needed. The TT RS also comes with a rear limited slip differential. Fun fact about the TT RS is it actually uses MagneRide adaptive dampers, which I've always been really impressed with in other cars that I've driven, like the Camaro SS1LE. We're on some Continental summer tires. The car is almost bone stock. The only mod that Gregory has done to it is an upgraded dog bone engine mount. So the extra NVH that you hear from the engine, that's not stock. That's because the engine mount is much stiffer than the OEM mount. Now the conditions on this road right now are not exactly ideal. It's been flooding up here in the Bay Area for the past couple of weeks, so there's a lot of gravel and just standing water on this road, which might be interesting actually, since we can test how well this Quattro all-wheel drive system works. Some water there. Gravel basically around every blind corner. Man, we're in for a fun drive today. The sound of this inline 5 is so unique. It's true what they say, it does sound kind of like a baby V10 in some ways. Lots of torque in the mid-range, a little bit of lag below 3,000, but at 3K and above, this engine really pulls hard. Really good throttle response for a turbocharged engine, I must say. Now the steering, being electric power steering, is pretty light and pretty numb. Not a whole lot happening in terms of road texture being transmitted through the steering wheel. Let's go ahead and turn traction and stability control fully off, but we're not going to turn the sport button on, which turns these MagneRide dampers into its stiffer setting, as well as sharpens the throttle response. There's no reason for the dampers to become as stiff as they are in this sport setting, in my opinion. And the enhanced throttle sensitivity makes the throttle feel like an on and off switch. Let's do a little straight line pull here. This engine, I absolutely love this 5-cylinder. It's so unique. In fact, I think the only cars that you can buy nowadays brand new with a 5-cylinder are the new TT RS or the RS3, both of which you cannot get with a manual transmission. Love that throttle response. Little bit of power on understeer coming out of those tight corners. Definitely feeling the limitation of a Haldex based all-wheel drive system there. Just doesn't have the ability to make the front to rear balance feel neutral on corner exit. Brakes feel decent, not amazing. We have 4 piston calipers up front, but they do require a very heavy right foot to get the car stopped. I do wish there was a little bit more initial bite to these brakes. In terms of suspension, in the softer mode, it's not overly stiff. It's also not floaty in any way. I think it strikes a pretty good balance for street driving. But like I said, in sport mode, the suspension becomes way too stiff for a bumpy road. The 6-speed manual transmission, unfortunately, is not one of the best. The gear ratios are fine, but the actual shift action is quite vague. It's quite sloppy. The throws are pretty long, and there's quite a bit of lateral slop. So driver inputs definitely are a weak point of this TT RS. The steering, the shifter, the brakes, all have a somewhat dull feel to them. The question is, does this engine make up for it? Let's do a little bit more driving here before we attempt to answer that question. Gotta say, this all-wheel drive system, despite not being razor sharp in terms of handling, it is giving me plenty of traction and therefore confidence on this damp surface. Got a little bit of air there. All right, so what's my conclusion in terms of how this TT RS drives? If I had to sum it up, I would say this car feels like a truly special, characterful, and powerful engine attached to a somewhat lackluster everything else. The driver inputs, the handling, the overall front to rear balance of the car, the way it makes the driver feel outside of the engine is just nothing to write home about. It feels like a pretty run-of-the-mill front drive platform that's had a bunch of parts thrown at it to make it feel like a performance car. Don't get me wrong, this car is pretty quick. The 0 to 60 time is rated around 4.5 seconds, and flat out, apparently it'll do 174 miles an hour. But it's just not the most precise or smile-inducing driving experience, at least for me. I think in order to truly appreciate this car, you have to have a higher than average focus on the engine and the engine sound. That's where I think this TT RS really shines above its competition. Nowadays, you can pick these cars up for as low as $30,000 up to around $35,000 to $40,000 for a really clean example. And at that price, you're basically competing with a clean low mileage 987.1 Cayman S. I think this TT RS has a way more characterful engine even than the flat 6, but the Cayman S has this beat pretty much everywhere else. Just about everything about that car feels far more driver focused. But I gotta say, this 5-cylinder engine, it's a special one. It's definitely a special one. As someone who's driven a lot of excellent sports cars, I'm looking for that cohesive package, a car that puts everything together. The engine, the inputs, the suspension, the handling, the brakes, everything needs to work for me to really lust after a car. And unfortunately, the TT RS doesn't quite do that for me. But that being said, what other manual transmission, all-wheel drive, small, sporty coupes like this are out there? Not a whole lot. The TT RS is a very unique machine, and I wouldn't fault anyone one bit for being willing to pay the 30 to 40 grand for a clean example. Let me know what you think of the Audi TT RS and how it compares to other cars in the $30,000 to $40,000 price range. I've really enjoyed the last month I've spent with this car, but I gotta say, I can't wait to get my BRZ back. Thank you all for watching. Subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you all in the next one.